You're listening to Building the Broncos with Nick Kendell and Carl Dumler, Broncos Country's leading draft and scouting analysts. Get on over to milehighhuddle.com to sound off on all things Broncos.
Hello there, Broncos Country, and it is once again time for another episode of Building the Broncos. I am your host, Carl Dumler, and with me as always, I have my co-host and good friend, Mr. Nick Kendell. Nick, season's over, and we got Wildcard Weekend to talk about here a little bit, but it's going to be a wild offseason for us here.
Yes, no, it definitely is. Like we've talked about in the past, we really needed Drew Lock to hit, following the Denver Broncos, but if Drew Lock could be the guy for 2020, then so much opened up for this upcoming offseason, from cap room to draft picks. I mean, it's really, the options are endless, and that makes this, gosh, for us who like to talk about, nothing really for hours, the possibilities that we can debate on and the different, mechanisms and routes that this team could take from now into week one next season. I mean, it's literally endless. So that's great for us and great for Broncos country, that we are not going to be set in another season where, well, we could do this, but nothing really matters until you find your quarterback. And that's a great place to be. Right.
Well, I'd heard some of the, radio guys were talking about this, and they said that they kept thinking like Elway had no plan over the last 4 years.
Yeah.
Well, it's kind of hard to have any plan until you get quarterback.
The plan is find a quarterback.
Yeah. So until you do that, you can't really design the rest of the roster, because you don't know, are you paying a veteran like Peyton Manning and trying to figure out how to build around him, or are you paying a rookie and trying to figure out what's going to be the best way to help him? There's two different paths you have to take in that kind of scenario. So yeah, it's going to be fun to really talk through all the different positions the Broncos can look at. Free agency, so many different directions they can go in. Top-notch players that they can go after, or they can go for the second-tier players and get a lot of them and really add to the depth of this team. It's going to be fun. I'm excited about it, and I'm excited to talk today just because we kind of got a little bit of, I guess I would say, a little glimpse of how the Broncos are viewing this offseason just by the press conference to close out the season by John Elway, Vic Fangio, and Ellis as well. Getting in there talking about a lot of things that are going on. He had some, maybe the biggest things to say was actually from Ellis.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy to say. But yeah, and then we're going to talk about some Wildcard Weekend games and maybe make some predictions, things like that. So it'll be a fun episode. I'm excited for it. But we also want to make sure that you can find us on Twitter. You can find me at Carl Dumler MHH. And of course, Nick at Nick Kendell MHH. And you can follow the podcast Twitter account at BTB Football Pod. And make sure you subscribe to our show and leave us a rating, as we value your input. You can find the show on iTunes, Stitcher, and even that of YouTube. Also, make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, a new affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Also know that this podcast is powered by Overtime Media.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, and welcome back to Building the Broncos. Like I said, we really want to dig into this press conference because, pretty much the entire press conference was about this offseason and what the Broncos are going to be doing, how the Broncos are going to be looking. And Elway-Fangio, Ellis, they all seem to actually, I think maybe one of the biggest things I took away is they all seem to be on the same page.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And direction is something that, we've questioned here for a bit. And listening to Elway and Fangio, you can hear that they're not always on the same page about some things, but they're hoping to get that better in the future as they kind of figure out each other a little bit more, get on the same page. And that's a great sign. There's a lot still in the air. Listening to them talk, and Ellis, whether it be the ownership situation or even how this team is going to be built, there's numerous things that can happen that probably are going to happen over the next 3 seasons that are going to change this franchise. But it does seem like there is more synergy and people just being on the same page as far as the direction of this organization. So that's good. That said, some of it is a little bit nerve-wracking, I guess is the way to put it, especially the ownership stuff.
Yeah. Well, yeah. That's always one of the most underrated parts of an NFL franchise. Look at the teams that are looking for a new head coach right now, and some of those owners and just how involved they are. The Washington Redskins owner came out and said, "Happy Thanksgiving, everyone." What? That's your owner? It's a whole mess. And so, yeah, ownership plays a huge role in how a franchise is going to do. Obviously, Bolin, he set the tone for everybody in the Broncos organization from top to bottom, and he cared about everybody from top to bottom. And so getting an owner like that just is huge to talk about. And so, yeah, we'll get into that conversation here in a little bit. Something I did want to point out here, just maybe this is going to be our first thing that we talk about maybe, is, how do I want to word this? I guess I was very interested in the fact that Vic Fangio had a lot of say in how the Broncos conduct this offseason, such as going to Elway and saying, hey, let's not start evaluations day one. Let's wait a month and then come back when the emotions are out of the picture and then really evaluate each of these players and which ones we really want to bring back or how we want to move forward with certain players, maybe move on from certain players, all those kind of things. I just found that interesting that Elway was actually really willing to listen, because that was one of the big things that people point out sometimes, is that Elway is kind of a my way or the highway kind of guy.
I think there's a little bit of trust in the old man in regards to this as well. I mean, Elway has made changes recently, listening to his coaches. You've seen that, going from Kubiak and Vance Joseph kind of changing the draft strategy a bit to now Fangio changing how they're evaluating their own free agents. So I like it. I think it makes a lot of sense. And for being somebody who wants to remove all emotion from football analysis and team building as much as possible, call me being on the spectrum or something. I don't care. But as far as nostalgia and sentiment, there's not really much room for that when building a football team comes, especially with the margins being so small. So I really like this. I agree with this being the thing that they should do, because the closer you are to the season ending and everything, especially with how players kind of tend to play down the stretch, you kind of put too much weight on the recency bias, I guess, so to speak, but also some emotional bias being it either way. Whether there's a player that didn't really rub you the right way, who's, because of that, their film, you kind of look at it with a negative scope, or a player you absolutely love emotionally, the mentality, and then you look at the film and you give them kind of a boost or tend to make excuses for them. So that's something that I can't help but think that's the right decision to make. And maybe that can give them a jump start on the film for the upcoming NFL draft. And that's honestly, you should be putting more on the film when you're evaluating prospects than this bonus stuff that we tend to get as we get further and further away from actual football, where people are putting more weight on the combine, the Senior Bowl, pro days, etc., than the actual tape, which is a mistake that we see time and time again. Right.
I mean, one of the top quarterbacks hitting the free agent market. Oh my goodness, why am I spacing him?
Teddy Bridgewater?
Yeah, Teddy Bridgewater.
Hey, look at me go.
Man, we're in sync. If you can come up with the names, I'll come up with the thought. But no, I mean, you think about, he was considered a top 10, top 15 kind of player until his pro day. And then all of a sudden, teams started overthinking things, and the guy drops to the end of round one. And yeah, he hasn't quite been like all-star kind of quarterback, but he's been starter quality quarterback. And sometimes that's all you really need for a lot of teams out there. But I did have one question with this, though, of waiting on those evaluations. Is waiting that long maybe going to hurt them some in some of the contract talks? Because I'm guessing they won't start contract talks until they've done the evaluation. And so you're not starting until early February deciding whether you're going to be trying to bring back a guy or not. And so you've lost a month of negotiations. Is that going to be an issue?
It could be, but I think you probably already are set. Like, the one name that pops out here is Justin Simmons, and I think you're probably still approaching Simmons no matter what this early on. Now, to what extent, it's more, honestly, I think that's more about the market than any difference you're going to take away from the tape. So I don't put too much on it. Maybe you're going to lose a guy like Will Parks that could be had now, that instead ends up hitting the market and being valued more elsewhere. But I still think you can live losing Will Parks. Now, would it be nice to have him back and kind of have that special teams nickelback type of guy? Yeah, sure, but he's not a must-have. So I think it's probably, there is some give and take on this. I agree with your point, but I think it's probably overall more positive. Yeah,
I did have a talk with somebody that is close to Will Parks today.
Okay.
and they did say that the two sides are negotiating.
See, that wouldn't shock me at all. It's more about, I think they'll probably bring him back in the end. And I don't think he's going to want a crazy contract, but we'll see. It's all just projection there. So
yeah, they said he likes his role in Denver and just feels like he's a good fit with what they're doing. And so they're both trying to figure something out to make that work. Like you said, I mean, it's kind of one of those, with certain players, you set a number and you say, we're never going above this. With others, like Justin Simmons, and we'll talk about him more here in a little bit, you're willing to really kind of maybe go above what you're comfortable with just because of how good of a player and how good of a fit they are within the organization and even within the community itself. I mean, it was kind of that with Von Miller, where they paid him probably more than what they were a little bit comfortable with, but at the same time, they knew we can't let this guy get out of here either. So just some things to kind of keep in mind. And then that kind of brings me here. Let's start with an easy one that they brought up. Von Miller, they said he's going to be a Bronco next year. They're picking up his option. I mean, right now, it'd pretty much take a ridiculous trade for the Broncos to think of not having Von Miller with the Broncos in 2020, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, he's back. He's so important for this team, and besides the areas on the field, and anybody who really digs in on his sacks as being the telltale sign for his level of play, I think that's a box score scout. And what do we do when we come across a box score scout? That's right, everyone. Grab your crucifix and grab your garlic and close your eyes and start saying prayers, because that person is probably possessed, evil, or stupid. And either way, I think that's probably a solid response. So just don't get sucked into that.
Right. So, yeah, like I said, that's an easy one. Von being back, that's huge. It's not only that he is a great player on the field, it's that he is a great leader within the locker room. He's a guy that every young kid looks up to. He is that face of the franchise. So keeping him around, very, very big deal. But then that brings us to maybe the other big face of the franchise right now, Drew Lock. And the Broncos, I mean, sometimes you kind of wonder why people word things the way they do. But Elway did say, he said, I don't see any other options right now. Obviously, he finished and did a heck of a job and won 4 out of 5 games and played well. But he still has a long way to go. He has a lot of work to do. We're excited about where Drew is. I don't like to show our hand, but I think it's unrealistic to say that we're going a different direction. So it's a long way of saying Drew Lock is the quarterback for 2020.
Yeah, and I put in the other. I think he meant to say other. He said, I don't see any options right now. But it was like the very first thing he said coming in. So I think he meant to say any other options. You know, that's where they are at their roster, and that's probably where they're going to be going. So yeah, that's my thought on it. And it makes sense. I mean, he's cheap. What are you going to have on the open market? You're going to bring in Eli Manning, or are you going to pay Teddy Bridgewater? No. Phillip Rivers? I mean, all these options make less sense than getting a guy like Drew Lock on his rookie contract and seeing what he has by really building an offense around him this offseason and wondering if he can take that next step. You know, is he going to be anything beyond a Derek Carr, Dak Prescott quarterback where you want to bring him back? That's to be seen. But that is probably the biggest question. Now, things be tossed out, can't talk. All that tossed out if a Peyton Manning kind of situation happens, but the odds of that happening, slim to none. I mean, maybe Tom Brady at some market, Phillip Rivers. Still, though, you're going to have to pay those guys pretty well, and with Drew Lock showing enough how cheap he is, the new CBA coming in 2021, you probably are best served going next season with the cheap quarterback and Lock, seeing what he has, and hoping that works out, if not reassessing a year from now.
Exactly. I mean, he is the centerpiece that you can build around, and if he doesn't work, then you can put another centerpiece in there, and it's already surrounded by talent. I mean, that's kind of the nice thing that you get when you've kind of got this kind of situation where you can be a little more aggressive everywhere else. But yeah, I think they had to say it. I mean, it's pretty much everybody knows. It's been amazing just to see over the last 5 weeks how often 5 weeks ago people were having Broncos still take a quarterback in the draft. Now you don't see anybody hardly ever taking a quarterback, at least in the first 3 to 5 rounds of the draft.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's probably the way to go. Maybe the end of the 3rd round, you could see that happening. I have no issue if there's a guy they love there and you're still playing with all those excess picks. I mean, I'll ask you, I guess this question makes more sense. Do the Broncos have their number 2 quarterback on the roster right now?
No.
Well then, and looking around the landscape, how many teams needed to rely on their backup quarterback for at least a game this season?
I'm trying to remember what the number was of how many different quarterbacks played this year, but it was astronomical.
Very high. So
yeah,
you're not bringing in a guy there to beat Locke by any means, but to push him a bit, to maybe, let him know that, hey, we like you, but also if you don't do your job, we're looking for your replacement. And they're just having better talent on there. I mean, if that quarterback hits and he's better than Locke, hell yeah. If he's worse than Locke, but he's still good, then you can trade that for better resources later. So I'm not going to limit it there by any means, but probably not a pick you're using in the first 75. Playing with the San Francisco and the Pittsburgh pick, I'm not going to rule those out completely yet. I think that's you have a little bit more leeway after those first 3 picks where you probably need to get more day 1 guys or ones that you can project more as starters beyond 2021 kind of thing.
Right. Something that's always stuck out to me with the draft is how few of quarterbacks are taken in that late second, third, fourth round area.
Yeah.
I mean, it's either they're going early or they're going late. There's just not much in between.
Yeah.
And, but at the same time, if the Broncos are only looking for really a high quality backup that really fits their system and fits behind Locke, then that gives them some opportunity to maybe pick somebody that somebody else was maybe hoping would last a little bit longer. And then you got this really cheap quarterback room for the next 3 years that you can really, really build up this roster. I'm still of the sense that I'd rather them go ahead and still bring in a veteran. Go get yourself another Missouri Tiger and Chase Daniel.
Yeah.
And, pay him, $4 or $5 million a year. And that's still a really, really cheap quarterback room, but it's at least hedging your bets a little bit. And I have no problem them drafting a rookie as well. And then you've got at least 3 decent options that you can work with and try to figure out, okay, what are we going to make work here?
Yeah, I agree with you. That's probably the biggest thing. I wouldn't mind bringing in Fitzpatrick. Heck, if Eli Manning wants to come for cheap here, I'd love his kind of boring, very overly white dad energy to kind of center Drew Lock a bit, just to really hedge your bets against the Baker Mayfield-isms. But I don't mind that, or even, quarterback kind of like that as well, drafted day 3. But it's one of those positions you should probably take, if not every year, every other year. And I'd never feel too bad taking a lottery ticket there. Is the odds of hitting it lower? Maybe, but you're playing with lower odds there once you get out of the top 100 anyway, so it doesn't really bother me that much. People freaking out about the Broncos using a 5th round pick on quarterback, meaning that means they don't believe in Drew Lock. That's silly.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right, well, let's switch topics here a little bit, and let's start talking about Justin Simmons. And really, most of the veterans or the free agents that the Broncos have, they've kind of been wishy-washy of whether they were going to bring him back, what was going to happen with them, those kind of things. But with Justin Simmons, it really does seem like they are bound and determined that this guy is going to be a Denver Bronco next year. They talked about obviously wanting to get a long-term deal done, but at the same time, Elway never ruled out the fact that they might tag him if they can't get a deal done. So it's one way or the other. He's still going to be a Denver Bronco next year. And on the other side of it, Simmons has said that he wants to be back in Denver, that he loves the system, loves the city, and loves this team. So it really does seem like these two sides are going to figure out a way to make this work.
Yeah, I would be shocked if Simmons is not back, whether that be the tag or something else. You just can't let him go. The question is more so, what are you paying him? You don't have to worry about it as much. Like with Chris Harris Jr. leaving, you're going to have some secondary cap, or it's just some cap released that you can spend or allocate there with Chris Harris Jr. leaving. And also you have a little bit more wiggle room with that rookie quarterback contract. Again, it's something we'll probably keep coming back to over and over again this offseason. But really, it's with that in mind, you probably can afford paying Simmons, maybe even front-loading the contract a little bit. And I wouldn't be shocked at all if his deal resets the safety market. And again, folks, something we say on here time and time again, just because Simmons gets paid the biggest safety contract ever doesn't mean he's the best safety in the NFL. He's pretty darn good, but that's not what it means. if you're a competent player and with the ever increasing, inflating cap number, you're probably going to reset the market every time just because the cap gets bigger every time. So it's really more about who's the next guy to get paid rather than them being the best player. And obviously he's paid as the number one safety next season in that regard, but then the end of his deal, even next year, he's probably pushed down by one or two other people, and it just keeps going like that until the next time he's paid. And if he's that good, then maybe he'll reset it again. But that third contract, typically not the case. So really, you probably pay him close to $15 million a year over 4 to 5 years. Give yourself an option after that third year, and especially that fourth year where the dead money is not as high. You could potentially restructure and move on if you want. But I think 15 APY, that's probably what he's going to get. Right now, Kevin Byard is making a 5-year deal worth $70.5 million. There is a buyout, I believe, or an option out after the second year, but he's making 14.1 APY. So Simmons making about 15, I think that is probably what you'd expect him to get, maybe 14 to 15, but now we're just pushing numbers there in that last kind of 1,000 to 10,000, which isn't chump change, but I mean, it can be kind of negligible there at the end. So I think he's going to reset the market. He deserves it. They need to retain let's forget, we're talking about on-field play, but the locker room, what it means pointing to a guy and saying he does everything the right way, he's done everything we could have asked of and more. You pay those guys. You want to pay those guys because it sends a positive message to the locker room that guys who do things right, guys who are succeeding, we will reward you. So I can't see any situation where they mess around with him too much. And worst case, they end up using the tag. But I still think they get a long-term deal done with him before I don't know the exact deadline, but the date where they cannot negotiate a new deal with him anymore, which kind of is what happened with the Clowney and Texans thing this offseason. Yeah,
it's usually around like July 15th or something like that.
Yeah, I believe it's in July. You're correct.
And every player the Broncos have tagged, they've gotten a deal done by the deadline.
Yeah.
Since Elway took over, at least. So, I mean, I expect that a long-term deal will get done. I do want to point out, I know we always go back and forth on some of this with the PFF, but he did make their all-pro team as the best safety in football. So
it's a good guideline, but anybody uses it as the end-all be-all, especially for offensive line things, you need to allow yourself a little bit more nuance.
Right. But just pointing, I mean, it's easy to see the tape lines up with that Justin Simmons had himself a very, very good season and definitely, like you said, deserves to be paid as that top safety in football.
Yep.
Not maybe, I wouldn't say he's the best safety in football, but he's definitely up there. And like I said, you always reset the market.
Not always,
just
but if you're a top 10 player, young, that's just how it is. I mean, everyone was freaking out about Matt Ryan, Kirk Cousins. You see it every year. That resets the market, and you freak out about it in that moment, and then wait a year, and it's already been reset again twice over. I mean, remember everybody freaking out about paying Juwan James right tackle money? Now, in hindsight, yes, that was definitely probably a mistake given the injuries here and maybe some toughness, but that's already been reset twice since, and it hasn't even been a year yet. You had Trent Brown. Oh, he's paid. Oh, and actually he's going to be a right tackle. And now Lane Johnson as well. So there's a little bit of a sticker shock, but again, it's sticker shock. It passes.
Right. Just want to point out both those guys end up on IR as well.
Yep.
After they got paid. So, but I mean, it is. It's just a tough league to stay healthy for a full 16 games. And it's why you have to have depth on the roster. And it's why it's going to be interesting to see how the Broncos divide up all this cap space when it comes to who they're going to pay. And that brings me to one more player before we get to a break here that I want to talk about, and that they talked about getting a long-term deal done with Phillip Lindsay. Elway said, yeah, we'll look at that. Again, we'll get back into what we start planning and budgeting for 2020 and where we are money-wise. Phillip has done a tremendous job, and as Vic said last night, there are 32 dum-dums that didn't draft him, and I was one of them. Thank God we talked him into coming here. I would argue his mom actually talked him into coming there, but semantics there a little bit. Obviously, the Broncos had to make an offer in the first place. But still, I know you're not really big into paying running backs past their rookie deal. Are you okay with this idea of paying Lindsay, or is this kind of something you're going, no, let's not waste that money there?
It makes me a little apprehensive. I guess it comes down to the type of deal and the duration of it. Probably if you can extend this deal let's say you get Lindsay for another 4 years, and it's okay money, then I don't have an issue with it. I'm always a little bit apprehensive of paying running backs big money. I personally would rather draft them, use them up, and let them walk. So it comes down to the dollars and cents, the guarantees, contract structure, blah, blah, blah. He's going to get paid at some point coming up here anyway, being a undrafted free agent, but you can't hate it too much, right? Like, just the energy he brings, back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher. You don't want to pay like Zeke or guys like Gurley, those absolutely cap hamstringing contracts, but I'm thinking you're probably not going to have to do that for Lindsay. I don't think he's thought of that level of player. I mean, let's be honest, he doesn't bring what those two bring as far as being the identity of an offense and also receiving back. So again, allowing a little wiggle room there. I wouldn't hate it. I also am not going to jump up and down for it, but I understand, again, trying to reward a guy who's doing everything right, and with how little he's making, you can afford to throw a bone his way. Right.
Again, like you said earlier, just that symbol that it shows to the rest of the locker room of you do things right, the organization will actually take care of you. That is huge. Mm-hmm. And it makes guys feel a lot more comfortable in what they're doing and where their contract situations are at for, when they're getting to their time of possibly getting paid, all those kind of things. It makes a big difference. And so, like you said, if it's more in the, Mark Ingram kind of money where he's making $5 million a year.
Yeah.
Really, when you look at the entire cap, that's chump change.
Yeah.
All right. Well, lots and lots more to get to in this press conference that was talked about, from Elway to Fangio to Ellis. Like I said, we still have some very, very big things to get to, but we need to take a quick break. So here's one of our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
All right, and welcome back to Building the Broncos. We're going to switch here a little bit to just the locker room talk of where the Broncos are at and why they feel a lot better of where they're at now compared to last season even. And I think one of the big things, well, there's two things I want to point out. One, since Manning left, you have heard every single veteran talk about just this vacuum that has been left in leadership and just accountability and all those kind of things. And they just keep talking about when Manning was here. Well, Manning's not walking through those doors as a player anymore. It's just not going to happen. And so in some ways, one of the best things the Broncos have kind of done is they've gone young. I mean, they have the third youngest roster in the NFL, youngest offense in the NFL, and they've really started that rebuilding of the entire culture and now making it where it is the young guys becoming the leaders of this locker room. And he talked about that they've bounced off the bottom. And if you really think about it, we talked about it on the last podcast, the Broncos were fourth place. Was it 2 seasons ago?
Yep, just two seasons ago.
Yeah, third place last season, second place this season. And so you see that little bit of growth. I think it's Benjamin Albright that talked about it, that teams have to learn to go from losing big to losing small to winning big. And that's exactly kind of where the Broncos have been going, is learning how to do all those things. And you saw over the last, especially 5 weeks, the Broncos were winning small for the most part, other than the Chiefs game. And of course, I mean, I know the Houston game, you can say they won big. There's going to be games like that. That's kind of more of an anomaly than anything else. But really, they won a lot of close games. And so they're kind of really rebuilding that. And it just really points to the Broncos have really brought back a lot of accountability. And I'd say that really starts with Vic Fangio, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I definitely do think it starts with Vic Fangio and just the kind of guys they've been drafting. I mean, team leaders, football players, a reset in the locker room. I mean, again, this team undoubtedly on paper misses the talent of wide receiver Emmanuel Sanders at wide receiver too, but there was a lot of talk that he was not the best in the locker room, despite how good he was at his own public relations. So, again, a addition via subtraction and further separating yourself from the Manning era. You know, you needed new leaderships, and here it came. This is exactly what you needed. So I definitely think it's a big thing. You know, they bottomed out, and now they're kind of bouncing back up. And we saw the bottoming out this season, I guess, against the Chiefs, or that, especially that game with Flacco Thursday night. I mean, that was bottoming out. That was that was a hard game to feel good about anything happening with this Broncos team in the near future when you're so close to that game. But feels like everything's heading in the right direction. I thought it was interesting also that he talked about that, Elway that is, talked about doesn't really need to bring in guys anymore that need to be locker room culture changers, but rather guys that can help add to this locker room. And really do feel like this locker room is kind of starting to rally around Vic, rally around each other, and a big part of that is Vic, but also Drew Lock. So really exciting to see that. Doesn't mean that they should be bringing in a bunch of potentially toxic guys, but having a little bit more stability, leadership, guys in there offers some flexibility in that regard where you can take potentially a little bit more risk.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, you don't want to go too crazy the opposite direction because in reality, I was talking with somebody about this of when they do the executive of the year conversation, really they should be looking at what they did 2 to 3 years ago, because then you're beginning to see really the true impact of what they're doing. And right now, the Broncos have done really well these last 2 drafts. Well, I don't want to change too much from what has gotten them there. I don't want to go back to let's go draft a bunch of athletes and hope that we can turn them into football players. Because that's how you got into this void of not having great depth, not having great players by doing such a thing, that you had to really go out and get a ton of free agents to try to hope that you could build a roster that would compete, and it wasn't working, obviously. So I don't want them to get too far away, but at the same time, I do agree they could maybe take a few more chances here and there to really round out this roster and get them where they could actually compete with the Chiefs for the division.
Yeah, unfortunately, it does feel like this team is heading in the right direction, but seeing them stack up against Kansas City should have put it into perspective just how much more they need to do before they are truly competitive. That being said, Mahomes is paid soon. This is potentially the most talented team that he will ever have as far as his surroundings go. So the Broncos are far behind them right now, but that's, there's not no hope. It's not hopeless. So we'll see how it plays out.
All right, well, let's talk about a position that some believe there is no hope, and that is the tackle situation that the Broncos brought up. And if you listen to the language of Elway and Fangio, I think some people are going to be a little disappointed by this, but there is a very good chance Garett Bolles will be the starting left tackle of the Denver Broncos next year. And, I mean, he talked about the fact that Bolles, I think as Vic Fangio actually talked about, he didn't miss a single practice, didn't miss a single snap this year. There was 2 offensive linemen that didn't miss a single snap. Can you name the other one? Should be pretty easy, actually.
Connor McGovern?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah,
I mean, Reisner missed some time. So.
Yeah, he did there with the flu and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's something to look at, considering, like, as great as Juwan James played when he actually played, 30 snaps, 40 snaps, whatever he ended up with for the season, that's nothing. That's not even a game's worth of snaps. So you have to have a guy that can actually stay on the field. And Bolles has been that. They talked about how he progressed as the season progressed. And so their plan is to get together with Munchak and Cooper and really see what they have to say. So, I mean, if Bolles is the starter next year, you have to know that Munchak and Cooper approved that decision. So keep that in mind, that they would approve because they would think that they can work with him and get him to a better place. But it doesn't mean that tackle's still not a huge need on this team.
Yeah, I think we talked about it some last week, but for me, tackle, it's not a wide receiver or bust position by any means, but it's also not off the table round 1. It just depends on how the board falls, and potentially you could get some versatility as well. I mean, I've spoken with some, including Eric Trickle, who has said that some scouts think Wirfs, Thomas, and Wills could play interior as well as tackle, maybe even be better at interior for some of them, but we'll rule that out when we get there. But it's definitely an option. It just doesn't have to be the option. Either way, though, they have to take somebody in the top 100 because you can't trust James to play a full season. And Garett Bolles, maybe they do exercise that 5th-year option on him. They don't have to decide that until, I believe, May. So probably round 1. If they get a tackle round 1, then you probably don't exercise that 5th-year option on Bolles. But if they don't, I could see them doing that because it's only guaranteed for injury. So at least you have him on contract for another 2 seasons, relatively cheap. But it's a top 100 need, no doubt. Just not offensive tackle or bust, like many people in social media on any draft article tend to scream from the comment section.
Right. I was going to say, I just had a guy on, I think, the Mile High Huddle fan page talking the Broncos should use their first 4 picks on offensive line.
Okay, Boomer.
I was like, oh, wow, that's not a good idea. Yeah. There's a lot of reasons that's a terrible idea, but it is still a need, like I said, and maybe there is a guy out there that can pull the Miami Dolphin way of doing things where Dolphins drafted a first-round tackle, but they already had 2 starting caliber tackles, and so they moved him to guard. And like I said, some of these guys can play guard. I mean, I'd love to see Wirfs at guard. Oh, my gosh. 3rd down and 1, yeah, good luck stopping the Broncos on that. Yeah. I mean, with Reisner on one side and Wirfs on the other side, good luck. So, but like I said, we have to have some kind of security for like a Juwan James, where Elway talked about him, where it is really about him getting healthy this offseason. And they did talk about, hey, we paid this guy money. He needs to get out there. And I mean, that's about the most obvious statement that there is. But it is something that they do seem pretty worried about, of whether James can really be a consistent guy that they can depend on.
It's unfortunate with James. Maybe he'll be back next season, and getting Bolles and James at tackle. I mean, you saw what that offense looked like in that one half where they had that. It was night and day difference, granted small sample size, but still you have that, and they'll probably bring in somebody offensive line-wise, whether it be retaining McGovern or paying somebody else, along with Reisner and somebody else emerging on the interior. That's makings of a pretty good offensive line. It's just you can't really depend on James at right tackle. And also you can't go into next season having Jake Rodgers and Elijah Wilkinson being the backups in regards to pushing Bolles. So you just got to get better there. And unfortunately, Alex Leatherwood returned. He was a guy that could have been on the Broncos' radar at pick 15 because he is versatile, probably closer to more of a bottom of first-round pick. But you never know how the draft process plays out exactly. So tackle class is thinning a little bit there, but still, if not round 1, you got to walk away with 1 round 2 or 3. You have to. It's the economics of the position. And letting Munchak pick a guy that he can develop into a starter sometime in the future, because odds are you're going to see them at some point with Juwan James' injury history and maybe Garett Bolles needing a break because he's kind of snowballing.
Right. Well, and I think that's one of the nice things about this draft is there's a lot of high-ceiling tackles, guys that just need some development. That second tier of guys are a lot of developmental projects that really look the part, but just need to clean up a lot of their technique. And, I mean, who better do that than Munchak? So I'm excited to see what the Broncos do at that position moving forward. But, like I said, Garett Bolles, very good chance. If nothing else, he's on the team. I mean, he's at least a quality backup for you, if nothing else. But like I said, you need to bring in some competition, and you need to understand that there's a chance that he'll be the starter, and we'll just kind of see how he does moving forward. But that brings us to the position that really is kind of you have to do something at it, and that's wide receiver. You can't go into next year with Sutton and a bunch of Jags. And I know people will point to, well, look what Hamilton did over the last 2 weeks of the season. I would say, I mean, it showed some promise, and it showed what he can be for this team, but it's still a limited role. He's not a guy that's going to challenge a defense down the field. He's not going to make them back off to help in the run game. It's not going to take pressure off of Sutton. He's not a guy that's going to be more than probably what he did is probably some of the best work he's going to do. That 65 yards a game. I don't think you're going to see many games where he's going to go above that kind of mark. And so expecting him to be more than a wide receiver number 3, I'm sorry. That's just – you're not seeing it as clearly as you can. There's a lot better options out there. And then Tim Patrick, again, I mean, a decent weapon, a decent depth piece for the Broncos, but that's what he is, depth. You need a starter quality player opposite of Sutton that really makes defenses have to game plan for them. And thankfully, I mean, that is one area in this upcoming draft that is still very, very strong, that there are a lot of wide receivers that would fit that role perfect.
Yeah, I agree with you. Let's pull back on that topic a little bit. Obviously, this is building the Broncos, and we're going to be pretty draft heavy going forward. So pick 15 right now. Who are the Broncos that are the wide receivers that you would grade as heck yes within that range, that if they were there, you'd have absolutely no issue? Are there any, I guess?
Well, yeah, there's a few, actually. CeeDee Lamb's my top wide receiver. If he's there, I'm running to the podium. There's not many players in this draft that I'm taking over CeeDee Lamb. Is he the perfect fit of what the Broncos are looking for, of that deep speed wide receiver? No. But he has such an all-around game, and I think he is such a great fit with what Drew Lock brings to the table, where he's not always perfectly accurate, so you need wide receivers that can go up and make a tough catch sometimes. I think he'd be just a great fit for what the Broncos need. Beyond him, you got Jerry Jeudy, who just was the Citrus Bowl MVP. I think had, 200 yards receiving. Just huge weapon. I've been a little bit more down on Jeudy lately, but you still see the skill set that just would be very, very impressive moving forward.
Did you see that's Justin or Shannon Sharp's number one wide receiver?
I did.
Granted, he hasn't done too much work on it.
I'm sure, yeah. I mean, Judy's been hyped up for a long time now.
Yeah.
He's been the number one guy for a long time, and so I think some people are starting to catch up and say, okay, well, maybe. But, yeah, there are a few limitations to his game. I don't know how he does catching in traffic because he's open so much. I mean, they can run a wide-open system there in Alabama because they go 4 deep at wide receiver with probably first-round talent at each of those positions. On top of a strong running game, there's just – Jeudy isn't asked to do a lot of the extra things that you like to see out of wide receiver. Doesn't mean he can't do it. You just don't see it very often.
Yeah.
And then he's not really the deep threat. This is where I think some people get lost in the conversation about Henry Ruggs. Because Alabama wasn't a vertical team as much as they were a horizontal team.
Yeah.
And because that fits to a lot better, where that doesn't fit Henry Ruggs as well. And Ruggs still made plays, but you think about you pair him with Drew Lock, who loves to go vertical, you're going to get a lot more opportunities for a guy like Henry Ruggs to go out there and really show off that speed and become that huge threat to just take the top off of defense. And even if they have perfect coverage, that guy with that kind of athleticism can really destroy a team. So,
yeah, I also want to just do a victory lap real quick because I've been screaming about speed since probably last May. And I don't want to say I was pooped on a little bit too much, but I kept screaming about how it was as important of an aspect for this offense as solidifying that offensive line. And listening to the people in charge of the Broncos, it sounds like they align with me more than the classic old person with a flower picture typing in all caps on my draft articles. So the wide receiver's option is need. I do want to clarify, though. I see a lot of people talking about the speed comment, and they think purely deep threat. And that's not my understanding of the Kyle Shanahan offense. I see a lot of people talking about Robbie Anderson being an option for the Broncos, and I'm not saying he's not, but I think that the speed is not just deep threat burner. I mean, Fant and Sutton can kind of be deep threats in that regard, but it's different. It's not just vertical speed; it's horizontal speed. And I don't think it's just boundary speed either. I would argue that slot speed, the ability to run a slot fade, which is becoming such a huge part of offenses throughout college and the NFL, or a wide receiver from the slot up the seam to stress those 2 deep safety shells. So, yeah, a lot of people thinking, that boundary receiver that can be kind of a Z and run deep, but we're not real. I don't think they're looking for that kind of guy as much as they're looking for a little bit of the smaller, more versatile speed. So that's just my opinion where they're at right now.
Well, and I do want to point out, a guy like Henry Ruggs, if you look at the plays that he was most successful at, it wasn't always the deep throw. It was those quick slants where he'd catch that 5-yard pass and his speed would destroy angles of any team. And so all of a sudden he turns that 5-yard pass into a 70-yard touchdown. And when you can have that kind of weapon that really just completely changes a game in one play, that's what they're looking for. And just a guy that can really make a team have to figure out, okay, how do we defend this? Because you can't leave this guy one-on-one. Even if he's not as good overall as Cortland Sutton, you still can't leave that kind of speed one-on-one because he breaks one tackle, he's done. I mean, it's a touchdown. So you still have to have how you scheme things up changes just because that kind of speed is on the field. And so, yeah, I'm with you. It's not just about the deep threat, although I do think that's still a part of it just because Drew Lock likes to go deep. And so when you can have both the short, quick pass that can go for a touchdown or the long pass go for a touchdown. You love having both. And so, again, wide receiver is a huge need for this team. They just have too many wide receivers that are similar in what they bring to the table and just guys that don't really stress defenses like you would want them to. So definitely think the Broncos, you have to think in their first 3 picks, wide receiver is going to be one of those. Even if they go out and get a guy in free agency, they're still probably going to take a wide receiver early in this draft.
I like it. Alrighty, well, moving on now. You're going to talk about the Joe Ellis. That's the one. Getting there. So Joe Ellis talked about, the Broncos don't sound like they're changing their uniform until new ownership comes, which is fine. I guess I'm a little bit bummed because I love the old school D, but they're not going to do that until the new ownership comes. There's some talk about Joe Ellis and said some players, and he prefers the navy blue. I think that's silly. I'm definitely more of an orange guy. I guess we'll save some jersey talk for more offseason, but what do you think about that?
Yeah, I'm with you. Orange is more the color that really has represented the Broncos to me. I mean, I know blue's been around for a long time. I mean, since they changed it, what was it, 97? Was when they changed the blues being there?
Yeah.
Yeah. But still, orange is just that color that sticks out. Like, there's a lot of teams that have blue or something similar to it. Orange, there's nobody that really has that orange that pops. I mean, I guess Tampa Bay with some of their older jerseys when they do some of their stuff. But it's not a pretty orange. The Broncos have like an orange that's just like, that looks like the sunset, and it warms my heart.
It's gorgeous.
Yes. And
so,
it's also,
we're orange.
Yeah. And so it's also like looking in the stadium when you see all orange, man, it's just nice to see. But yeah, let's get to the big topic that was brought up there's 2 big topics that really affect the Broncos, especially over the next couple of years. First is Joe Ellis lobbying for the Broncos going to London in 2020. So, I mean, it sounds like the Broncos really want that international game. Do you remember when the Broncos had their last international game?
It was the Spygate Broncos version where they played the 49ers in 2010.
Yep.
So I remember that game. I was a freshman in college. So, yeah, that was probably one of the low points for this organization, but it kind of led to a massive, quick turnaround, getting Von Miller, John Elway in the front office, and Peyton Manning in the next 2 seasons. So, that's, again, talking about that bouncing off the basement floor. That's kind of what we're hoping for here with Elway going forward. This season, trending in the right direction now. So we'll see. But personally, my thought is I would love for them to go to London. It's likely against the Atlanta Falcons, which gives the Broncos one less true away game. I really hope they don't end up playing in Mexico City. I do not want to play. I don't want to lose a home game, first off, but I do not want to play on that horrible, treacherous joke of a turf that is those Mexico City games. Now, Denver would kind of have a little bit of an advantage, being that they play at altitude and the Mexico City Stadium is at even higher altitude. But you can miss me with that. That game just scares the crap out of me because looking at it, you might as well be running on razor blades or something. Just a knee injury away feels like it's magnified by like 10.
Well, and I feel like just looking around, London seems to have a ton of Bronco fans.
Yeah, so Mexico City, Chargers or Raiders. Oh my God, no.
No, thank you. So I think London, you'd actually have more of a home crowd favoring the Broncos, especially over the Falcons, if that's what ends up happening. And so I'm all for it. Like I said, it's one less true away game. Almost could probably turn into a home game for the Broncos. And it's just kind of neat that they get it would be a primetime kind of game. Now, the crazy thing is then it could be one of those like start at 7 a.m. kind of games.
Yeah.
Or I guess it would be, is it 9 a.m. that they start there?
I think so. A lot of times, though, it depends on where you're listening from.
Yeah, that's true. I guess, well, in Central Time that you and I are at, I think it's 9 a.m. for us. So, unfortunately, that'd probably be a game I'd have to miss. That's the only thing that's...
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I know.
You're busy Sunday mornings.
I know.
Yeah.
But that's okay. I can make the sacrifice for it to be kind of a cool game that the Broncos have.
Do you have any televisions in your chapel?
I could stream online.
I was going to say, you kind of have ones maybe for the words or something, for the songs or the prayers. Kind of turn those around so while you're giving the sermon. Like, it's to the back of all the people in the pews. But
right.
You won't get distracted. You're good enough.
I could just have my wife and kid out in the lobby because there's windows that can see out into our lobby. And they could be watching the game and act out every play for me.
Oh, that would be way better.
That would be awesome. Oh, my gosh. I might have to talk my wife and kid into that one. But no, so that's a big one. But also another really big point that, I mean, this is
probably the biggest we heard from all the points.
It is.
As far as any of them, yeah.
And this is, I mean, it's the hard thing. It's both promising and terrible all at the same time because you just don't know what's going to happen with it. But Ellis did say it is Brittany Bolin or bust for ownership. There is no other child that's being considered. And so he pretty much said, every other sibling, get on board or we're selling the franchise. And that's some pretty powerful words. Ellis has never talked like that when it comes to ownership of the Broncos until now.
That's not what you want, really. I just really don't think this is going to get worked out. I think that there's too much, what's the word I'm looking for here? Too much ego in regards to the entire Bolin family, and I don't think they're all going to get in line with Brittany being the guy. So I think in the end, the Broncos get sold. And what does that mean? Who knows? Adding that element of unknown is always risky, but it's probably better than being stuck in this limbo that they've been in for the past few seasons. So the stadium's named. They should be fine there for a bit. I don't see them being moved from Denver, but could see some things change. And I guess at this point, given how much is unknown, got to hope for the best. But I foresee this. If you made me make a bet right now, I think that in the end, this team is actually sold.
Yeah, I'd lean 75-25 right now.
It's just because I have zero faith in the Bolin family coming together based on what I've heard about the kids and just some of their, we'll call it, immature behavior. Right.
Well, I mean, the son, he was the one that was saying that only a boy should run the organization.
He's kind of an idiot.
Yeah. And then, of course, you got Beth, who's been fighting for a while. You got even Bolin's brother that's been fighting the whole thing, causing all these problems. I don't know. It's just been a whole mess. And really, I guess for me, like, what is the other than the family, the team staying in the family name, what's the advantage to saying, yes, hey, my sister gets to run this organization? I mean, if it gets sold, good chance you're getting about $400 million in money.
Yeah.
If it's not sold, you don't get $400 million. You still get some money, but it's not like it's not that money. So it's just really hard for me to see them all coming together and being willing to put their own selfish desires aside for what might be the better bit of the team.
Can't see it happening.
Yeah. So, yeah, we'll see what that could mean. There's a lot of different names being thrown out there. Jeff Bezos' name, I know, is one that he wants to get into NFL ownership. Not sure. I'm not a fan of that. Just how he runs Amazon makes me go, no, thank you. Who was the other?
We'll see. There's an African-American owner that I believe he was one of the ones who tried to buy the Panthers but was turned down. That also had a minority ownership group with Peyton Manning. Maybe I'm getting that mixed up, but it seems like something that's pretty far out yet, so I haven't done the homework on as far as the nitty-gritty of the details and the possibilities.
Yeah. I know there was actually, I think there was something about the one of the ownership groups that tried to buy the Panthers, Peyton Manning was a part of it.
That's what I was saying. I think that's the same one.
Is it? Okay. I wasn't sure if that was the same one or not. But that'd be an interesting thing that if Peyton was, I think the idea was that Peyton would be kind of run more of the day-to-day stuff, where some of the other guys would be more the money backers that would kind of see how that goes. But it's going to be a pretty stressful couple years here trying to figure this out. I think the board, the NFL has approved them to continue to be in power until like 2022. So they have 2 years to really get this ironed out and figured out who's going to be the owner.
Well, we will see. I am doubtful they'll figure it out. I think it'll be sold, but who knows what happens in that process. Again, we'll talk about that as that gets more inevitable. But we should probably take another break here. Already close to an hour long. We want to talk a little bit of the upcoming wildcard game, so we'll be right back, folks.
This is the Overtime Podcast Network.
Alrighty, and welcome back to Building the Broncos. I am Nick Kendell along with Carl Dumler. Carl, it's Wildcard Weekend, and unfortunately the Broncos for the third straight season will be watching from home, but that's not going to stop us from enjoying football this weekend. At least for me, I think Wildcard Weekend and Divisional Weekend are the best two of the year because you have high-quality NFL games with huge stakes, obviously, on Saturday and Sunday. So football all weekend. I can tell you my wife is ready for football to be over, but alas, we have another month to go, and I'm going to enjoy it while I can. So the first game we're going to be getting Saturday at 4:35 Eastern Standard Time. So that'll be 2:35 for you Mountain listeners. We have the Bills at the Texans, the 5-seed Bills at the 4-seed Texans. The Texans are favored by 2.5 points right now, and the over-under is set at 42.5. So, Carl, what are you thinking?
Well, it's kind of a crazy number because that means they actually think the Bills are a better team since they give 3 points to the home team. I'm still going to go.
I think the Bills are the better team.
Yeah, I'm still going to go the Texans, though, just because of the quarterback difference.
Yeah.
I mean, Josh Allen, he's been okay this year. I have no problem with what his game has been. I'm glad the Broncos are not tied to Josh Allen, I guess, in some ways. But still, we're talking about Watson, one of the top 5 quarterbacks in the NFL. And really, when it comes to playoffs, a lot of times it does kind of boil down to quarterback play. And so I just feel more comfortable giving Watson the opportunity to go out there and make a play than I do the Bills. It also does sound like Will Fuller is going to be back for this game. And really, the Texans' offense kind of goes as Will Fuller goes.
Yeah, that was going to be my point, is that Will Fuller is going to be a game-time decision. So that makes me apprehensive of picking the Texans because I think that Will Fuller is such a catalyst for this offense. I mean, again, talking about space creators and how important having that guy is, even if he's doesn't even have a catch, he's going to be an impactful player because you have to eliminate the home run threat. Otherwise, you could get killed quickly. So I'm going to go with the Bills. Personally, I think that the Bills are the team to go with, and in the end, that's where I'm going to lie on. So, Carl, I think the Bills are going to end up winning this game in the end, with the over and under being at, 42.5. I'm going to go with the Bills and end up winning this one 21, with the Houston Texans scoring 17. And Josh Allen lives on to fight another game.
Oh, man. I'm going to go Texans win this one. And I think they're going to win 24-20, so I have the over on this one.
Okay. If Houston wins, it's probably the over. If the Bills win, it's probably the under. But
there you go.
You never know. It's a playoff. Crazy things can happen. And on Saturday, Carl, am I reading this right? Both AFC games are Saturday and both NFC games are Sunday?
Yep, the Saturday matchups are both AFC and Sunday is both NFC.
Well, that is odd. But now on to the Saturday game, the last Saturday game, 8:15 Eastern Standard Time, so 6:15 out there for you folks in Mountain Time. Titans versus the Patriots. The Patriots are being favored by 4.5. My heart is telling me the Titans will win this game, but I think the Patriots are still going to be the Patriots. I don't think they're going to go to the Super Bowl this year, but I think after being embarrassed by the Dolphins, I think they find a way to stymie the hype train, the good play that has been Ryan Tannehill and that Derrick Henry run-first offense. Yeah, can they slow down A.J. Brown from the slot? That'll be a big one. We'll see, but I think the Patriots in the end are going to win this game. I'm going to go Patriots 24, Titans 17.
Yeah, it's on paper, I feel like actually Tennessee's the better team. They have a pretty good defense, especially with your boy Simmons that's been playing really well since he's come back from injury. And then, of course, offensively, with Tannehill, they've been such a different team. But it's hard to pick against the team that has the experience in the big games. They know what they're doing. Belichick on the other side. Although Vrabel, he's one of my favorite young coaches in the NFL.
Yeah.
And he's one of the few people that there's been some interesting stories coming out about the Patriots of there are things that Belichick does with the players that he doesn't let his other coaches in on. And so Vrabel's been able to get both the coaching and the player perspective of what Belichick does. And I think that's why you're seeing him have a lot of success as a coach. But I'm going to do it. I'm going to take Tennessee. I'm going to disagree with you on both AFC games here. I think that with their run game, Derrick Henry getting healthy again. I think he's going to have a couple really big runs in this one, especially with that offensive line just really gelling lately. I just think that Tennessee is going to come out with a close victory. It's going to be low scoring. I think this is kind of that 20-17 kind of game. Tennessee wins.
Alrighty, so on to Sunday. We have at 1:05 Eastern Time the Vikings at the Saints, the biggest spread of the weekend. 7.5 to the Saints, the over-under at 49.5. I like Mike Zimmer. I like this Vikings defense, but Kirk Cousins, he's very possibly the worst quarterback in this tournament. So I'm going to go with the Saints winning this game. I'll go 31-20 Saints.
Yeah, I'm with you. Saints just have too much on both sides of the ball. Drew Brees seems to be on a mission this year. I just, especially after how the playoffs ended last year for them. And so I see them coming out with a victory. I'll go 28-24.
Alrighty, in the final game, the only game where the away team is favored this week, you have the Seahawks going to Philadelphia to play the Eagles, 4:40 Eastern Time, so 2:20 for you mountain folks out there. The over-under is 45.5. I think that the Seahawks are going to win this one. Best quarterback here, Russell Wilson, and they are dinged up a little bit, but so are the Eagles. I mean, who Carson Wentz is playing around right now is just devastating for him. I'm a Carson Wentz fan. I feel a little bad for him. I mean, Miles Sanders, good player. Dallas Goedert, good player, but no Ertz. The wide receivers are dreadful. The offensive line is dinged up pretty good. So I think in the end, the Seahawks are going to win this one. I'll go Seahawks 23, Eagles 20.
Yeah, there's probably not two more banged up teams heading into the playoffs than these two. And, I mean, when Marshawn Lynch is coming out of retirement,
yeah,
that's not usually a good sign. I mean, I'm not saying Marshawn Lynch is a bad player or anything like that, and maybe he'll have a little bit of an impact, but he wasn't playing good when he retired. So, but I do have the Seahawks, like I said, Russell Wilson just playing lights out. I like what he's doing with his game. I think there's enough pieces there in Seattle just to come away with a victory. And they've been finding ways just to win a lot of close games this year. So I have them winning. I'll go 24-21. Seahawks win.
Alrighty, well, that's going to wrap up today's episode of Building the Broncos, powered by Overtime Media. You can find Carl on Twitter, at Carl Dumler MHH, and myself, at Kendell MHH. Make sure you head on over to milehighhuddle.com, an affiliate of the Maven Coalition and Sports Illustrated. Go on to iTunes and leave us a 5-star rating and a comment, as your support can help us continue to bring you our Denver Bronco deep dives. You can follow the Building the Broncos podcast and all our other great audio content by subscribing to the Huddle Up podcast wherever you listen to your shows. You can follow us on Twitter, at Mile High Huddle and at BTB Football Pod. For Carl, I'm Nick, wrapping up another episode of the Building the Broncos podcast. We hope you guys enjoyed it, and we'll see you soon. Go Broncos.
You've been listening to Building the Broncos. Join Broncos Country's deep divers at milehighhuddle.com to keep the conversation going.